Naledi aching stood in the doorway, her hand still resting on the frame, like her body had forgotten how to move. The room felt smaller than usual. Her stepfather, Moses Okello, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Give your university fees to my daughter, or I leave your mother." It sounded calm, almost casual. But the weight of those words hit Naledi all at once, like something heavy pressing down on her chest. For a second, she thought she heard it wrong. But the silence that followed made it clear. This was real. That money wasn't just savings. It was years of sacrifice. Long nights studying when everyone else was asleep. Skipping meals so she could save a little more. Walking instead of taking transport. Every small struggle had been for one thing, her future. Behind Moses, Sharon stood quietly, arms folded, watching. She didn't say anything, but her expression said enough. She was waiting, expecting. Naledi slowly turned her head toward her mother, hoping, just hoping, for something. A word, a look, anything. But her mother kept her eyes down, hands tightly clasped together, saying nothing. That silence hurt more than anything Moses had said. Naledi felt it then, clear and sharp. This wasn't about helping family. This wasn't even about money. This was about control. And in that moment, standing there with everyone watching her, Naledi realized something that changed everything. Whatever she chose next would decide not just her future, but who really had power in that house. Naledi had grown up learning that life wasn't fair, but she never imagined it could be this heavy at home. When her father passed away, her mother remarried Moses, a man who at first seemed kind, even caring. He smiled, said the right words, helped here and there. For a while, Naledi thought maybe things would get easier. But little by little, the truth showed itself. Moses's love had limits, and those limits ended at his own daughter, Sharon. Everything Sharon wanted, everything Sharon needed, came first. Naledi quickly learned that her own wishes and hard work could be ignored if they got in the way. She became the responsible one, the quiet achiever who kept her head down and did what was expected. She studied long hours, earned scholarships, and even tutored younger students to save money for her future. She believed her education would be her way out, a ticket to a life where she had control. Meanwhile, Sharon seemed to glide through life with few rules, her mistakes forgiven, her demands met. Even small accomplishments from Naledi were sometimes brushed aside or met with jealousy. The tension grew quietly, like a storm building in the air. Sharon's resentment was subtle at first, a sharp glance here, a snide comment there, but Naledi felt it. Every achievement she celebrated was shadowed by the awareness that it was making her stepsister uncomfortable. Moses didn't notice, or didn't care. His priorities were clear. Naledi's sacrifices and successes weren't enough to earn the same recognition that came so easily to Sharon. At home, love was measured in attention and control. And in that measurement, Naledi always came second. Yet she didn't complain, at least not openly. She learned to keep quiet, to work harder, and to hope that one day, all her effort would pay off. Deep down, she knew that her education wasn't just about grades or scholarship, it was about freedom. But every day in that house reminded her that some battles weren't about school or money, they were about surviving in a world that wasn't built for her. It was a life that shaped her resilience, teaching her to move carefully, to watch, and to wait for the right moment to claim what was hers. Little did she know, that moment was coming, and it would change everything. Naledi had waited years for this moment, and when the university acceptance letter finally came, it felt like a door opening to a life she had only dreamed about. It wasn't just a letter, it was a promise of freedom. She had worked so hard to get here, earning scholarships, studying late into the night under a small flickering lamp, and saving every coin she could. The remaining fees for her first year were the last piece of the puzzle, the sum of years of sacrifice, careful planning, and small, painful compromises. She remembered all those nights she went to bed hungry just so she could put a little more money aside. Walking long distances to school instead of taking a bus to save a few shillings. Tutoring younger students after her own long day of classes, trying to stretch every minute, every shilling, every chance she could get. That money wasn't just cash in a bank account. It was dignity. It was her independence. It was the proof that she could carve out a life on her own terms, away from the constant control and judgment of her stepfather. And now, standing in the doorway, Moses's calm voice demanded it all. "Give your university fees to my daughter, or I leave your mother." It wasn't about necessity. Sharon didn't need it to survive. This wasn't about keeping the family afloat or making ends meet. It was about convenience. It was about power. Moses wanted to take what she had fought for, what she had earned, and hand it over to his own child, as if her years of struggle meant nothing. Naledi felt a hot knot of anger and fear twist in her stomach. This money wasn't just her savings, it was her chance to escape, her ticket to a future where she could be free from the unfairness that had defined her life at home. One sentence had suddenly threatened everything she had worked for. But even in that moment, as the words sank in, a quiet determination started to grow inside her. She wouldn't just give it up. Not now. Not ever. This was more than money. This was her life. And she was beginning to understand that if she lost this, she would be losing herself. Naledi looked at her mother, desperate for even a flicker of support, a look that said, "I've got your back." She searched her mother's eyes, hoping for a sign that someone in the room understood what was happening. But her mother's gaze stayed low, fixed on the floor, hands folded tightly in her lap. "We need peace in this house," her mother said softly. Those words hit Naledi like a blow she hadn't expected. Peace. This wasn't about peace. This was about taking everything she had worked for, everything she had saved with her own sweat and tears, and handing it over to someone else. This was about sacrifice, her sacrifice, and her mother's words made it clear she wasn't going to stop it. Moses leaned back slightly, his expression calm, satisfied, like he had already won. He framed it all as a simple matter of family duty, as if Naledi giving up her future was a small, necessary step to keep everyone else comfortable. Sharon didn't say a word, but the smirk on her face said it all. She expected this outcome. She believed it was her right. Naledi felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, the years of being ignored, of being overlooked, of being treated like her efforts were invisible. For so long, she had carried the responsibility, the expectations, and the silent struggles on her own. And now, standing there in the quiet of the room, it hit her fully for the first time. She had always been alone in this fight. The silence wasn't comforting. It wasn't gentle. It was sharp, heavy, and suffocating. It spoke louder than any words Moses or Sharon could have thrown at her. It was a reminder that she could rely only on herself. Every ounce of strength, every careful plan she had ever made, every dream she had clung to, they were hers alone to protect. In that moment, Naledi felt a shift deep inside her. The room around her was filled with calm voices and unspoken expectation, but inside, a storm was beginning to form. This wasn't the end. It was a turning point, and she knew she would have to face it head-on, by herself if she had to. Naledi didn't shout. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded, her face calm, steady. "I understand," she said quietly, almost too quietly to matter. To everyone else, it probably looked like surrender. But inside, everything had shifted. Something that had been growing quietly in her chest finally took shape. This wasn't defeat. It wasn't giving up. It was planning. Calculation. That night, after the house had grown silent and the lights were dim, Naledi pulled out her notebook. She flipped to a blank page and began writing. She wrote down everything, every date, every conversation, every detail about the money she had saved, every step she had taken to get to this point. She wrote down what Moses had said, what Sharon had expected, and what her mother had, or hadn't, done. She traced every pattern, every imbalance, every moment of control that had been forced on her. For the first time, she saw it clearly. If she couldn't fight with anger or tears, she could fight with knowledge. If she couldn't change their minds with words, she could change the game with strategy. Every plan she wrote down was a shield, every note a step toward keeping what was hers. She knew she couldn't lose her future. This money, this opportunity, was everything she had worked for, and no one, not Moses, not Sharon, not even her mother, would take it from her. But she also realized she didn't have to fight the way they expected her to. They wanted her to react, to cry, to beg, to make herself small. She would do none of that. Instead, she would move quietly, carefully, like a chess player setting pieces for a win no one else could see coming. Her obedience would be her mask, her strategy hidden beneath it. They would think they were in control, but the truth was, she was already planning her escape. That night, with pen in hand, Naledi made a decision. She would protect her future, and she would do it on her own terms. The fight hadn't ended. It had just begun, but this time, she held all the cards. Naledi knew she couldn't face this alone, so she reached out quietly, carefully, to the people she trusted most. First, she spoke with Mr. Kamau, a teacher who had always believed in her, who had stayed after class to help her when no one else had. She explained the situation, and he listened without judgment, offering advice and encouragement. Then she contacted a university advisor, someone who knew the ins and outs of scholarships, fees, and student protections. She even reached out to a legal aid group for students, learning about her rights and how to keep her savings safe. Every conversation gave her more clarity, more tools, more ways to protect what she had worked so hard for. At home, she kept her face calm, polite, and obedient. She answered questions, helped with chores, and smiled when expected. Moses relaxed, thinking he had total control. Sharon began daydreaming about what she could do with Nalady's money, planning trips, clothes, and possibilities as if they were already hers. The tension in the house shifted, but it wasn't in Nalady's favor, or so they thought. Behind that quiet exterior, Nalady was planning. Every move she made at home was deliberate. Every smile, every nod, every casual conversation was part of her strategy. She was no longer reacting out of fear or frustration. She was preparing. Preparing her finances, preparing her arguments, preparing her escape. She kept a careful record of her savings, moved some funds to a secure account no one could access, and double-checked scholarship options that could cover her tuition. She was building safety net, not just for herself, but for her future. Nalady felt a quiet power growing inside her. It wasn't the loud, angry power that Moses tried to wield over the family. It was steadier, smarter, and hidden in plain sight. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was taking control in ways they would never expect. And while everyone around her assumed she was compliant, obedient, and powerless, she was quietly stacking the pieces for the moment when she could finally make her move. For the first time, Nalady felt like she wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She was a player. And the game was about to change. Nalady walked into the living room, her face calm, her voice steady. "I'm ready to transfer the money," she told Moses, keeping her tone even. He smiled immediately, that smug, satisfied smile of someone who thinks they've won. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You're showing maturity, loyalty to this family." He leaned back, clearly pleased with himself, as if this small act proved he was in control. Sharon's eyes lit up, a quiet victory shining behind them. But what they didn't know was that nothing had actually changed. Nothing had moved where it shouldn't. Instead of handing over her savings, Nalady followed the plan she had laid out weeks ago. She redirected the funds into a secure account that only she could access. She had taken every precaution to make sure no one, Moses, Sharon, or even her distracted mother, could touch it. At the same time, she quietly reached out to the university, securing additional financial support she could rely on if anything went wrong. She applied for emergency grants, double-checked scholarship disbursement, and ensured her tuition would be covered no matter what. Everything she did was careful, deliberate, and invisible to those who thought they were in control. She kept her movements small and calm, letting Moses believe he had won. He praised her, assumed she was obedient, and even bragged a little to neighbors and relatives about her loyalty. Sharon began daydreaming about what she would buy, still unaware that the money she thought would be hers was out of reach. Inside, Nalady felt a quiet thrill. For the first time, her actions were truly her own. She wasn't reacting. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't scared. She was in control, even while everyone else thought she had surrendered. It was perfect theater. To Moses, it looked like obedience. To Sharon, it looked like victory. But the truth was hidden behind calm eyes and a steady voice. Nalady had protected her future without anyone realizing it. She had outsmarted them quietly, ensuring that her education and her freedom was safe, no matter what came next. For once, her calm wasn't weakness. It was power. And for Nalady, it felt like the first time she was truly untouchable. The day Moses expected the money, Nalady didn't rush or act nervous. She sat at the table with the family, calm and steady, letting the moment stretch just long enough for everyone to settle. Then, in a clear voice, she spoke. "The funds are secured for my education. They cannot be accessed." For a heartbeat, Moses froze. The confident, relaxed expression he always wore vanished, replaced by something sharper, anger creeping into every line of his face. Sharon's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" Sharon snapped. "You're betraying us. This was supposed to help me." Nalady didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or beg for understanding. She explained, calmly but firmly, exactly what she had done, how she had protected her savings, how she had arranged additional financial support from the university, and why her future couldn't be put at anyone else's mercy. She spoke of her rights, her plans, and the years of effort that had led to this moment. Moses's anger grew, but Nalady didn't back down. Every sentence she spoke chipped away at the illusion of his control. His threats, his calm authority, the way he had always demanded obedience, all of it lost its power in that room. For the first time, he had no leverage over her. Sharon looked between them, confusion and fear flickering across her face. She had thought her victory was certain, that the money would fall into her hands, that Naledi would fold under pressure. But instead, Naledi had turned the tables without raising her voice, without anger, without begging. The shift in the room was quiet but absolute. Naledi's calm authority replaced the tension Moses had always used to dominate the family. Her stepfather's control, which had seemed unshakable for years, now felt brittle. Sharon's smug certainty faded, replaced by the uncomfortable truth that Naledi was no longer someone to push around. For the first time, the balance had changed. Naledi wasn't just protecting her money, she was asserting her independence, her voice, and her right to decide her own future. And in that moment, everyone in the room realized that the rules had changed. The family had entered a new reality, one where Naledi was no longer the one under control. She was the one in charge of her own life. Moses's face tightened, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "If you won't give the money," he said sharply, "then I'll leave your mother. That's what I promise." The room fell silent. For a moment, it seemed like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Naledi to break, waiting for her mother to beg or apologize. But no one did. Then her mother spoke, her voice soft but steady, carrying a weight it hadn't held before. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing stability, afraid of what might happen if we upset him. But I see now what it's cost you, Naledi. Too much." The words hit the room like a quiet thunderclap. Moses shifted in his seat, his threats suddenly feeling smaller, weaker. He could yell, he could demand, but the control he had relied on for years had slipped. No amount of intimidation could take back what Naledi had protected. His power, which had once dominated the house, was cracking under the weight of truth. Sharon, who had spent so long expecting to benefit from her father's control, looked stunned. She had assumed the money, and the power it represented, would always be hers if she waited long enough. Now she had to face reality, her dependence on others, her lack of independence, and the fact that life didn't always bend to her wishes. For Naledi, the shift was almost tangible. She had spent years being overlooked, dismissed, and forced to compromise, but now the family dynamic was breaking open. Secrets, fears, and hidden resentments surfaced in the quiet tension of the room. Things that had been left unspoken for years were suddenly visible, and the cracks in the household were undeniable. Moses realized, perhaps for the first time, that authority isn't the same as respect, that threats alone cannot hold a family together. And Naledi's mother, once paralyzed by fear, began to see the truth. Protecting stability at the cost of her daughter's future was a mistake she could not undo. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of possibilities. The old rules, the ones Moses had controlled for so long, no longer applied. The family was changed, whether they were ready to admit it or not. And for Naledi, this was more than a victory over a stepfather's threats. It was the moment when the hidden truths of her life finally came into the open. Weeks later, Naledi left for university. She walked through the gate with her bag on her shoulder, her head held high, and a calm confidence in her step. She didn't leave full of anger or resentment. Instead, she carried clarity, an understanding that she had earned her freedom and that no one could take it from her. At home, things began to change too. Her mother, slowly and cautiously, started rebuilding her own independence, realizing that stability meant nothing if it came at the cost of her daughter's dreams. Moses's influence, once so strong and unshakable, began to fade. The threats, the control, the intimidation, they no longer had the power to shape the lives of the people around him. Naledi's story didn't make headlines or social media trends, but it spread quietly through the neighborhood and the community. People talked about the young woman who had stood firm, protected her education, and claimed her future. Others who had felt trapped, overlooked, or silenced began to see that change was possible. Her courage wasn't loud, but it was contagious. The ending wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no confrontations, no sudden reveals. But it was powerful in a way that mattered more. Naledi hadn't just kept her education safe. She had rewritten the rules of her life. She had proven that intelligence, patience, and quiet strategy could overcome control and fear. As the bus drove her away from home, Naledi didn't look back with regret. She looked forward, toward a future she had fought for, a future she had earned. And in that calm, determined stride, she carried a lesson far bigger than any classroom could teach, that sometimes the strongest victories are the ones fought quietly, wisely, and on your own terms.